Most people look at the Amazon and see a forest so vast it feels almost passive, as if it has simply been there forever, waiting to be admired. But the Amazon is not still, and it is not merely a forest. It is a living engine built from moving water, trapped heat, rising vapor, drifting sediment, and distances so large they begin to control human life. Rain does not just fall here. In many places, the forest helps call it back. Rivers do not simply cross the basin. They rearrange it, feeding some ground, drowning other ground, deciding where boats can move, where towns can hold, where people must wait. Across northern South America, the air feels heavy before the storm arrives. The mud remembers the river's last decision, and life gathers along banks, docks, ferries, and stilts. To understand the Amazon, you have to stop seeing trees as the story. The real story is motion. And that story becomes visible first in the city, where dark water, pale water, trade, weather, and human ambition meet. If the Amazon has a front door, it does not open into silence. It opens into Manaus, a city that only makes sense once you understand that this basin has always been ruled by water before it was ruled by roads. Here, near the meeting of the waters, the logic of the region becomes visible. The dark Rio Negro and the pale, sediment-heavy Solimões run beside each other without fully blending at first, as if two separate worlds have agreed to travel together without surrendering their identity. That is not a visual curiosity. It is a warning. The Amazon is not one simple river. It is a negotiation between systems, each carrying different temperatures, speeds, chemistries, and histories. Along the docks, ferries, cargo boats, and market traffic turn that hidden geography into daily routine. Metal railings sweat in the heat. Engines throb against wet air. Goods, people, and weather all arrive by water first. And beyond this hinge of trade and current, the river begins to expand until ordinary scale stops making sense. Leave Manaus, and the Amazon begins to destroy ordinary proportion. What looks like a river starts behaving like a moving continent. Channels widen until the far bank feels coastal. Islands seem permanent, then dissolve with season and current. The hidden force here is sediment. Far to the west, the Andes are slowly ground down, and that broken stone is carried across the basin as brown water thick with suspended earth. The river is not just flowing through the landscape. It is rebuilding it as it goes. Banks collapse, sandbars rise, floodplains expand, routes change, and settlements learn never to trust the edge for too long. From a boat, the water feels muscular, opaque, restless. Heat lifts off the surface. Docks sit high or low depending on the river's last decision. In the Amazon, geography is rarely fixed. It is negotiated between current, depth, and time. And farther on, the same basin reveals a completely different kind of river, darker, quieter, and shaped by another logic entirely. Then the Amazon changes its mind. In some regions, the river loses its heavy brown force and darkens into blackwater, smooth on the surface but harsh in its own way. Rivers like the Rio Negro carry far less sediment, yet they move through ancient, deeply weathered ground where nutrients have long been stripped away. Leaves, roots, and flooded vegetation stain the water a deep tea black, turning the current into something that seems to absorb light instead of reflecting it. The surprise is that abundance here is built under stricter limits. These waters can look calmer, even softer, but they feed a different world, one shaped less by fresh mountain sediment and more by chemical patience, adaptation, and scarcity. Beaches of pale sand appear in dry months. Flooded trunks rise from dark water like pillars in smoke. Boats move through reflections so perfect they almost erase the horizon. And between these river worlds, the basin begins to shift again, toward ground that can finally stay above the flood. For a while, the Amazon seems to belong entirely to water. Then the ground begins to resist. The change is subtle at first. Fewer drowned trunks, firmer banks, longer stretches of forest standing above the flood. But this shift matters because it changes the rules of life. On the floodplain, everything answers the river's rise and retreat. On higher Terra firma, the older upland ground beyond seasonal flooding, stability returns. Homes can sit back from the bank. Trails can last. Storage, travel, even memory become less temporary. The hidden force is not just elevation, but dependable footing. Once the ground holds, the basin stops behaving like pure current and starts dividing into zones of different human possibility. The air still hangs warm and wet, but the smell changes from stirred mud to bark, dust, and heated leaves. Canoes give way to motorbikes. Docks no longer define every settlement. And with stable ground comes a larger system waiting behind it all. The flood pulse that still controls the year, even where the water no longer reaches. In the Amazon, the year is not truly measured by months. It is measured by water level. Across huge floodplains, rivers rise out of their banks and spread into forests, grasslands, side channels, and shallow lakes, turning dry routes into waterways and firm ground into temporary memory. This is not a seasonal interruption. It is the system itself. The hidden mechanism is timing. Floodwater carries nutrients, opens breeding grounds, connects habitats, and then pulls back, leaving behind mud, fish-rich shallows, fresh edges for planting, and new limits for travel. Trees keep the marks of past high water like a second bark. Walkways are raised, boats retied, cattle moved, ladders extended. In the damp air, you can smell fermenting vegetation and warm silt before dusk thickens with insects. The Amazon does not simply support life with water. It schedules life with it. And once that rhythm takes hold, every settlement, market, and route in the basin begins to reveal the same rule. People survive here by moving when the river allows it. In the Amazon, distance is rarely measured by miles alone. It is measured by delay, by whether the channel is deep enough, the bank firm enough, the current mild enough, the season generous enough. That is why trade here has always been geographic before it is economic. A market is not simply where people gather. It is the visible end of a route that survived mud, fuel, flood, and time. Long wooden boats arrive low in the water with fish, fruit, cooking gas, crates, and news from places that may look close on a map but feel days apart in practice. Ferries carry motorcycles, hammocks, sacks of grain, and sleeping passengers beneath corrugated roofs slick with rain. Even roads, when they appear, often behave like temporary arguments against the basin, running straight for a while before surrendering again to ramps, barges, and river crossings. In the Amazon, movement is never assumed. It is earned. And farther in, beyond these working routes, the basin closes around itself into the defining environment of all forest, water, and air fused into one living system. Deep in the basin, the Amazon stops feeling like scenery and starts feeling like an atmosphere with roots. Here, forest and river do not stand beside each other. In many seasons, they occupy the same space. Water rises quietly into the trees, filling the understory until trunks become markers in a drowned geography and canoes move where people once walked. The hidden force is exchange. Fruit falls into water instead of soil. Fish feed among branches. Seeds travel by current. Moisture lifts from leaf and river together, loading the air until heat, mist, and rain begin to feel like parts of one machine. The air is thick enough to wear. Paddle strokes break dark reflections in slow flashes. Insects drill through the silence. A stilt house with a tied skiff and damp laundry can look fragile, yet it has learned the exact rhythm of the flood. This is the Amazon in its purest form. Not a forest near water, but a living system built by immersion. And farther on, that same logic opens into something larger, an exposed world of flood, sky, storm, and distance. There are places in the Amazon where the basin stops being read through the river alone and begins to be read through the sky. Over broad floodplains and open channels, water and atmosphere start behaving like one connected engine. Heat rises off the surface, moisture gathers above it, and storms build with a force that feels less imported than generated from within. That is the hidden mechanism. The Amazon does not simply sit beneath weather. In many ways, it helps create the conditions that weather answers to. You feel it first in the tightening air, in the metallic light before rain, in the way distant thunder travels through humidity, like pressure through fabric. Then the storm arrives, flattening the horizon, darkening the river, driving birds low and pushing ferries onward through sheets of warm rain. In the Amazon, sky is not background. It is part of the flood system. And when that open drama passes, the basin reveals another side of itself, a quieter world where movement slows, sound sharpens, and water begins to hold rather than carry. After the floodplain opens wide to weather and distance, the Amazon contracts into something more intimate. In side channels, oxbow lakes, and sheltered backwaters, the basin no longer announces itself through force. It works through silence. Water slows, reflections hold, and the forest leans so close that the line between land, light, and current begins to blur. The hidden mechanism here is retention. Not everything in the Amazon is built by speed. Some of its richest environments are shaped by what settles, what lingers, what stays warm, dark, and enclosed long enough for a different kind of life to gather. Fish hold in the margins. Insects thicken at dusk. Wet wood, leaf decay, and trapped heat give the air a dense, enclosed smell. A tide canoe, a narrow landing, a house raised above still water. These feel like small details, but they reveal another Amazon, one that must be read slowly. And once the eye adjusts to that quieter language, the forest begins to show its deeper textures. By now, the Amazon is no longer one color. It separates into textures, and those textures explain the basin better than any map. Buttress roots flare wide because the soil cannot always offer deep anchoring. Leaves shed water fast because saturation is constant. Vines climb because light is scarce below. What looks lush and excessive is often the result of pressure, competition, and adaptation. That is the hidden mechanism. The forest's beauty is functional. Every surface is solving a problem. Bark appears plated, scarred, silvered with lichen, or dark with moisture. Greens divide into waxy, feathered, hanging, broad, torn, and newly flushed. Underfoot, the ground can shift from red earth to root tangles to leaf litter already returning to decay. A narrow trail, a canoe dragged onto the bank, a weathered roof under palms. Human life appears here as another careful texture, brief beside the forest's longer design. And once that design becomes visible, the next truth is unavoidable. This vast system is finally understood through ordinary routine. For all its scale, the Amazon is finally understood in routine. Not in expedition images, not in aerial grandeur, but in the repeated mechanics of ordinary movement. Boats arriving before the heat thickens, fish laid on wet market tables, fuel drums rolled across warped docks, motorcycles waiting where the road ends and the river takes over again. The hidden mechanism is simple and decisive. In the Amazon, daily life is never separate from geography. A school trip depends on water height. A market depends on an open channel. A road matters less for where it runs than for where it fails, because failure reveals who still holds authority. Mud, current, season, and distance. That is why infrastructure here is rarely final. It is adjusted, repaired, lifted, retied, and negotiated. The basin does not reject human order. It reshapes it. And beyond these routines lies the deeper rhythm. They all answer to the seasonal breathing of water, wildlife, and forest. The Amazon does not divide itself into seasons the way temperate lands do. Here, the deeper rhythm is between rising water and falling water, between access and isolation, between exposed ground and drowned forest. The hidden mechanism is that local weather is only part of the story. Rain falling far away can reshape life downstream weeks later, meaning one village may be living inside the delayed consequences of another region's storm. That is why the basin behaves less like scattered territory and more like one connected body. Sandbars appear, vanish, then return elsewhere. Canoes are tied where children had recently walked. Birds gather on shrinking margins, then scatter once the flood returns. Fishing, planting, travel, and trade all shift with the level of the river. In the Amazon, season is not a change of color. It is a change of usability. And as that cycle repeats, the basin begins pulling us outward again, toward places where settlement thins and distance becomes its own kind of force. At the remoter edges of the Amazon, abundance gives way to exposure. The forest is still immense, the river still alive with force, yet human presence thins into brief signs. A roofline above the bank, a narrow dock, smoke rising for a moment and then disappearing into wet air. Here, isolation is not created by emptiness. It is created by weak connections, unstable routes, and the long delay between one place and the next. That is the hidden mechanism. In the Amazon, remoteness is measured less by miles than by the time it takes for fuel, medicine, weather, and news to arrive. Morning fog lies low over still water, then burns into hard white heat. Cicadas drill from the tree line. A distant engine fades, and the silence that follows feels structural, as if the basin has returned to its original state. In places like this, the Amazon stops looking like scenery and starts feeling like a system that allows connection, but never cheaply. And once that truth settles in, the whole region is ready to be seen as one living design. By the end of this journey, the Amazon no longer feels like a forest with a river inside it. It feels like a system so vast that water, weather, soil, distance, and human life are all part of the same design. That is the final correction. The Amazon is not defined by trees alone. It is defined by motion. Atlantic moisture is drawn inland. The Andes feed rivers with broken stone. Flood pulses redraw the edge between land and water. Black water and white water create different worlds. Roads pause where ferries take over. Towns survive where channels allow them to. Even silence has structure here. What looks wild from a distance is, in truth, tightly organized by current, delay, adaptation, and return. A stilt house, a market dock, a tide canoe, a storm-darkened floodplain, none of these are small details. They are clues. And taken together, they reveal the deeper truth of the basin. The Amazon is not scenery. It is one of Earth's clearest examples of a living geography that never stops remaking itself.